In the history of horror cinema, there exists a strange paradox. The most terrifying moments are often those where nothing happens. No blood, no screams, no sudden music, only silence, stillness, and an invisible tension creeping into the audience's mind. The four film scenes we will analyze today, from masterpieces by Jonathan Demme, Denis Villeneuve, Stanley Kubrick, Jonathan Glazer, all serve as testament to one truth. The most frightening evil is not the evil that roars, but the evil that remains silent, patient, and has integrated itself into everyday life. Each of these scenes is not merely the result of directorial talent or acting skill, but the product of bold artistic decisions, groundbreaking technical experiments, and sometimes harrowing psychological experiences that the film crew had to endure. Behind every second of silence on screen lies hours of preparation, debate, and refinement to achieve the perfection of the moment. First scene, Hannibal Lecter, waiting for Clarice. Hannibal Lecter in The Silence of the Lambs, 1991, is the embodiment of conscious evil. Upon his first appearance on screen, Lecter doesn't attack, doesn't commit violence, simply stands still. But the detail few notice is, while other prisoners scream, he stands straight and motionless. This is the fundamental difference. He doesn't belong to the chaotic world around him, he transcends it. Hannibal doesn't hunt with violence, he hunts with understanding. The most frightening thing in this scene is, Hannibal understands Clarice better than she understands herself. He doesn't need to advance, doesn't need to appear dangerous, just stand there, calm, alert, and observe. This scene makes viewers realize intelligence divorced from morality becomes a form of absolute power. We don't fear Hannibal because he kills people. We fear him because he sees through us, and we have nowhere to hide. Anthony Hopkins had a unique approach to this role, an approach that has become legendary in film history. Hopkins only appears on screen for 16 minutes in the entire film, but left an indelible mark. What's notable is that Hopkins studied real psychiatrists, but ultimately drew inspiration from an unexpected source, HAL 9000 from Kubrick's 2001, A Space Odyssey. Hopkins realized that the most frightening thing about Hannibal was not madness, but absolute rationality, devoid of emotion. Jonathan Demme made a bold and controversial directorial decision, breaking the 180-degree rule in cinema and having characters look directly into the camera. This is a technique rarely used in Hollywood films because it breaks the fourth wall, the invisible boundary between audience and character. But Demme realized that with Hannibal, breaking this boundary was key. He doesn't just look at Clarice, he looks at us, the audience. This creates an extremely powerful sense of psychological invasion. Jodie Foster, playing Clarice Starling, faced a major challenge. How to act opposite an actor you're not allowed to look at directly in the conventional way. In most scenes, Foster had to look almost straight into the camera, creating the feeling that she was looking into Hannibal's eyes. This required a special level of concentration, as Foster didn't have an actor's normal focal point, the eyes of the opposite actor. Instead, she had to imagine Hannibal's gaze penetrating into her. Hopkins recounted that in the first meeting scene, he decided not to blink throughout the entire take. This wasn't a director's requirement, but Hopkins' own acting choice. He had practiced this technique for weeks beforehand, to the point where he could keep his eyes open for over a minute without blinking. This small detail creates a strange effect. Hannibal is not just a human looking at you, but something else, something not quite human. Another aspect of the preparation was sound design. In scenes with Hannibal, sound designers created an almost absolutely silent sound environment. They eliminated most environmental noise. No air conditioning, no machinery sounds, only the sound of voices. This silence forces the audience to focus entirely on the dialogue, on every tone, every pause of Hannibal's. And in that concentration, we become more vulnerable. Hopkins also made an important creative contribution. The way Hannibal pronounces words. He added a light "ses" sound to many words, as if he were tasting each word before speaking it. This wasn't in the script, but it created a memorable and slightly frightening characteristic, as if Hannibal was eating language, savoring it like food. Demme loved this detail so much that he asked Hopkins to maintain it throughout the film. Scene 2, Keller Dover, looking at his child through glass. From inhuman villains like Anton and Hannibal, we move to a scene with much deeper humanity in Denis Villeneuve's Prisoners, 2013. The scene where Keller Dover looks at his child through glass has no violence, no music, no lengthy dialogue. Only Hugh Jackman standing there, and the eyes of a father existing on the fragile line between hope and despair. This isn't a scene of a father looking at his child. This is a scene of a man witnessing his own collapse. Keller doesn't cry because tears no longer have meaning. Doesn't scream because screaming won't bring his child back. The most painful thing in this scene is the silence, because it shows every belief Keller ever had in God, in morality, in what's right, is cracking. This scene doesn't ask, Are you willing to do bad things to save your child? It asks, when humans are pushed to the edge, do right and wrong still exist? Denis Villeneuve is one of the rare directors in modern Hollywood who still believes in the power of patience in cinema. When preparing for Prisoners, Villeneuve spent months working with Hugh Jackman, not on acting technique, but on the psychology of pain. Jackman, a father in real life, had to confront a difficult question. What would he be capable of if his child went missing? This preparation process was not just intellectual, but emotional. Jackman recounted that he would often go home after discussions with Villeneuve and hold his children tightly, feeling fortunate that they were still safe. Villeneuve has a special directing method. He often asks actors to perform multiple consecutive takes without cutting, even when the first take was technically perfect. The purpose is not to find the best take, but to bring the actor to a psychological state where they're no longer acting, they're simply existing in that moment. In the scene where Keller looks at his child through glass, Jackman had to perform this take 27 times. By the 20th take, Jackman was emotionally exhausted, and that was exactly what Villeneuve wanted. The final take used in the film was the 23rd, when Jackman had no more tears to cry, only emptiness remained. Roger Deakins, once again taking on the role of cinematographer, as with No Country for Old Men, created a special color palette for Prisoners, everything in gray, brown, and cold blue tones. He wanted the film to feel like autumn dying, like the world was losing its color along with Keller's hope. In the scene through the glass, Deakins used natural light from the window, but waited until the exact moment in the day when the sun was obscured by clouds, creating a diffused light without shadows, flattening Jackman's face and making him look as if he had lost depth, lost part of his soul. Villeneuve, the master of bloodless chills, used a simple but extremely effective technique, holding the shot for a very long time. The camera doesn't cut, doesn't move, forcing the audience to endure each passing second with Keller. This shot lasts 47 seconds, an unusually long duration in modern cinema, where the average shot lasts only 3 to 5 seconds. 47 seconds of silence, no music, no dialogue, only a man staring into the void where his child has disappeared. This is a form of psychological torture, not for the character in the film, but for the audience itself. We're not allowed to look away, not allowed to escape from that pain. Villeneuve said in an interview, "I want the audience to feel uncomfortable. I want them to sit in the theater thinking, please cut this scene, but I don't cut," because that's exactly what Keller is feeling. He wants this moment to end, but it doesn't end. Jackman shared that, during the filming of Prisoners, he had to see a therapist because this character had affected his psyche too deeply. For weeks after filming ended, Jackman still had nightmares about losing a child. This is the price an actor must pay when they go too deep into such a dark role. But this emotional investment created one of the most powerful performances in Jackman's career. A performance that doesn't rely on dialogue or action, but only on eyes and silence. Scene 3, Eyes Wide Shut, Bill being seen through in the clothes room. If Prisoners shows us the moral collapse of an individual, then Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut, 1999, expands the scope to sociological fear. The scene where Bill is seen through in the closed room is a masterpiece of existential anxiety. Everyone speaks politely, no one directly threatens, but Bill knows clearly he's in the wrong place. Bill's greatest fear is not being killed. It's realizing he never belonged to this world. Everyone is polite. No one shouts. No one threatens. But Bill understands very clearly, real power doesn't need to be loud. This scene makes viewers realize a chilling truth. There are systems you don't see, but when you accidentally step into them, you know immediately. Not because of what they do to you, but because they know who you are. Eyes Wide Shut was Kubrick's final film, and in many ways it was the final testament of a master of cinematic control. Kubrick was famous for demanding countless retakes until everything was perfect down to the smallest detail. But with Eyes Wide Shut, he took this obsession to a new height. Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, the two lead actors, had to work on this film for 400 days of shooting, a record nearly impossible to break in cinema history. The scene in the closed room, where Bill's identity is exposed, was shot 68 times. Not because of technical problems, but because Kubrick wanted to achieve a very specific feeling, the feeling of someone being observed by anonymous entities. Cruise recounted that in the early takes, he was still trying to act, showing fear, anxiety, but Kubrick wanted something different. He wanted Cruise to simply stand there and let the silence, the gazes of those around him, and the composition of the frame express the threat. Kubrick worked with his production designer to create the space of this scene with almost pathological precision. Every detail in the room was placed according to the golden ratio, creating perfect symmetry. This wasn't to create a sense of harmony, but the opposite. This perfection creates an unnatural feeling, as if this space doesn't belong to the real world. Bill, with his imperfect, asymmetric posture, becomes the only anomaly in a perfect system. The lighting in this scene is also a work of art. Kubrick used an alternating red and blue lighting system, a technique he had experimented with for years. Red light symbolizes desire, temptation, while cold blue light symbolizes danger, death. In this scene, Bill is bathed in both colors, creating a strange visual effect, as if he's being pulled between two opposing forces. To achieve this effect, Kubrick asked his lighting crew to create over 60 separate light sources, controlled independently. A little-known detail is that Kubrick required all the supporting actors in the scene, those wearing masks, to learn how to move and stand in complete synchronization. They trained for 2 weeks with a choreographer, learning to move as a single entity rather than as separate individuals. This creates the strange feeling that Bill is not facing people, but facing an anonymous collective, a collective power that he cannot resist. Tom Cruise shared that working with Kubrick was the most difficult experience of his career, not because Kubrick was demanding, though he was, but because his way of working forced actors to abandon all conventional acting techniques. Cruise, a formerly trained actor, had to learn how to not act, a difficult paradox. In this scene, Cruise had to stand and let himself be looked at, judged, without being allowed to react clearly. This was a major challenge for an action actor like Cruise, who was used to proactively expressing emotions. Scene 4, the zone of interest, family eating dinner normally. If the 3 preceding scenes all revolved around specific characters in extreme situations, then Jonathan Glazer's The Zone of Interest, 2023, takes us to another frightening depth, evil as part of everyday life. The scene of the family eating normally is one of the coldest scenes in modern cinema history, not because of what happens on screen, but because of what's happening outside the frame. This scene is frightening because it gives us no moral distance. This family is not constructed as monsters. They love their children, take care of their home, make small talk. And that's precisely what makes it truly horrifying. The film forces us to confront an uncomfortable question. If placed in that situation, are we certain we would be different from them? This isn't a film about crime. This is a film about human adaptation to evil. And when evil becomes familiar, it no longer needs to hide. Jonathan Glazer spent over 10 years developing this project, and the production process was one of the most challenging in modern cinema history. Glazer didn't want to make a film about the Holocaust in the traditional way. He wanted to show audiences the normalization of evil, how ordinary people could live ordinary lives next to crimes against humanity. To achieve this, Glazer made an extremely unusual production decision. He built the entire family house, an exact replica of the real house, and installed hidden cameras in every room. There were a total of 10 cameras running continuously throughout each day of shooting. The actors didn't know which camera was operating at any given time. They were asked to live in that house as if it were their real home, doing ordinary things, cooking, cleaning, chatting, for hours on end. This created a completely different acting style from any other film on this subject. The actors didn't act in the traditional sense, they simply lived. Christian Friedel, who played the husband, said that this experience was closer to a reality TV show than a feature film. The difference was there was nothing to perform, only daily life with the ghost of evil always present. The sound design of The Zone of Interest is a breakthrough achievement. Johnny Byrne, the sound designer, spent 2 years researching and creating the sound layers for the film. What's special is that the sounds from the concentration camp, screams, gunshots, the crematorium, are never clear, always vague, distant, but continuous. Byrne used spatial audio technology to create the feeling that these sounds come from all directions, surrounding the house, but the family in the film never reacts to them. Glazer asked the actors not to read the full script before shooting. They only knew about their character and the general situation. Each day they were given simple tasks: prepare breakfast, tend the garden, play with children, and had to perform them naturally. This created moments that couldn't be scripted, moments of uncomfortable truth. In the eating scene, the actors were really eating, really chatting about ordinary topics, and the camera simply observed. Another bold decision by Glazer was to never show the audience inside the concentration camp. All the horror happens outside the frame, only suggested through sound and sometimes smoke from chimneys. This was both an ethical and artistic decision. Glazer didn't want to turn the Holocaust into spectacle. Instead, he wanted to point out that the most horrific evil is not the evil we see, but the evil we choose not to see. The family in the film, based on the real family of Rudolf Höss, Commandant of Auschwitz, lives a materially perfect life. They have a beautiful house, a lush garden, healthy children, and all of this exists right next to the greatest crime of the 20th century. Glazer wanted the audience to ask themselves, how could this happen? How could people live normal lives while participating in genocide? The eating scene has nothing special technically, just a wide shot, unmoving, of the family around the dinner table. But when we hear those faint sounds from afar, screams, gunshots, and realize that no one in this family reacts, no one stops eating, no one stops laughing and talking, we witness the most horrifying thing: the complete normalization of evil. Evil is no longer something special, no longer something shocking. It has become part of daily life, like birds singing in the morning. So, what these four film scenes want to say, when placed side by side, is a profound truth about the nature of fear and evil. They don't need to be loud to be frightening. In fact, they're far more frightening when silent, because silence forces us to confront our own imagination, and nothing is more frightening than what our minds can create when given empty space. In an era where horror films often rely on jump scares, CGI, and graphic violence, these four film scenes are reminders of the power of classical cinema art, using time, space, light, and sound, or their absence, to create genuine cinematic moments. They show us that a good director is not one who knows how to add many things, but one who knows how to take away, who knows how to leave space for the audience to fill. These four directors, along with their courageous actors, have given us a valuable lesson. In silence, we hear our own voice most clearly, and sometimes that's the most frightening thing. They've proven that great art requires sacrifice, not just time and effort, but sometimes a part of ourselves. And perhaps this is also a metaphor for life. The most frightening threats are not those that roar in our faces, but those that are silent, patient, quietly creeping into daily life until they become an inseparable part. That could be moral paralysis, the normalization of violence, alienation within our own society, or simply quiet desperation. Finally, these film scenes are not just about fear, they're about awareness. They force us to look at what we usually avoid looking at, to hear what we usually cover our ears from, to feel what we usually numb ourselves to. And in doing so, they become a form of the highest art. Art that doesn't just entertain, but transforms. Doesn't just show us the world, but changes how we see the world.